Welcome back to Why Blank Lost. I'm David Bloomberg, and I'm sad that we lost two really fun people from Survivor this week. But to help me get through it is one of the most fun people ever, and someone who hopefully doesn't hate my face like Liana hates Xander's, my co-host Jessica Lewis.
Well, I appreciate that intro. I'm glad that you feel like I'm that fun. And yes, I definitely don't hate your face.
Well,
and I must say,
because otherwise I'd have to do the whole
That was a little aggressive. That was a little aggressive of Liana. I understand there's some animosity there that's been building throughout the season, but yes, she hates his face.
she wants him gone. She can't stand it anymore.
No, she just can't handle it. Yeah, so
I just wanted to be like, oh, how could you hate that face?
And I have a song playing in my head about a face, but I'm not completely sure about it, so I'm not going to sing it because I'll probably just get it wrong and it'll be terrible. But no, I will say that was kind of a disappointing challenge overall, just because we didn't get to see 6 hours of conversation because it was done differently.
I think Jeff Probst would disagree with you there. I think that it was altered so that he wouldn't have 6. I mean, think about it. When Christian did that, he made them change their production schedule. He hung on for so long.
I know.
That they had to move tribal council. In a shortened season, they can't move tribal council.
I know. So Jeff was like, we got to make this go quick. What can we do to make this challenge go fast? Yeah.
Yes. We will make it so painful that Naseer loses feeling in his arm and, in fact, has to have recovery, and just recently finally recovered all of the movement in his arm.
It's insane. The things that you go through. Listen, my toenails are still not the same. I'm just going to say that. So
you might just have to give us pictures at some time.
No. No one is getting pictures of these toenails. It is incredible the long-term effects that I have heard other survivors suffer with. Some people have had major surgeries from things that have happened on the island, even from like a bug bite. There's been some very significant injuries that people have had. Thank God I didn't have anything that serious. I did lose a toenail, so I will say, but it's one of those things that I know it's a lot of information, but these are the things that you don't think about when you are going out there, that you think about the major injuries and like, oh my gosh, and you sign all these waivers because I could die and these terrible things that could happen. But you don't think about just the effects that you can have on your physical body in like the most minimal ways. And I didn't think that like my toenails would be like forever destroyed. But yeah, I mean, you're out in the elements and you're wearing wet shoes and you're wearing no shoes and you're walking around in the ocean. And these are all things that can then have long-term effects on you. And I know that there are a lot of people that have things like that.
Yeah, hanging on a pole.
Yeah, you never know what is going to really do you in.
Yeah, you just nailed one of the reasons that I'm not going to be on Survivor right there.
Because of your feet.
Well, no, just the whole long-term effect, possibility thing.
You really have no idea. And then you hear stories from people and they're like, yeah, I had to have major surgery when I got home. What? Like, you don't even think for a second that somebody could suffer in that extreme manner, but they do.
All in the name of winning Survivor and entertaining us.
Listen, $1 million, I'll take nasty toenails, but I didn't win $1 million.
Yeah, so you got the raw end of the deal.
I did. I really did. It's terrible.
Yeah.
But anyway, moving on from my toes.
Yes, let's go back to the fact that we lost two fun people.
We really did. Like, I'm bummed. I'm definitely bummed. Yeah. Look at that. We're both.
We both thought the other was going to talk, so we took a drink and whoops. Okay.
You go ahead.
Okay. Well, yeah. I mean, unfortunately, being fun isn't enough to keep someone around on Survivor. And sometimes it works in quite the opposite way, which may just come into play as we review what happened to both Naseer and Evvie by comparing their games to the rules for winning that I originally wrote way back after season 1 and have been updating ever since. We look at all the non-spoiler information available to us from what we saw on TV, interviews, social media, and more. To see the most recent version, of course, go to our dedicated page at robhasawebsite.com/yxlostfeed. But before we get to those rules, as usual, I always say as usual, but I don't know that I've ever had a time when we didn't have something else to talk about.
I know.
So I should just change it to, as always, we have a few things to talk about from the episode.
Boy, do we.
Yeah, well, we can start with our predictions, which were identical last week. On the podcast, we both said Evvie would go. And then after we recorded, Survivor released a commercial telling us how it would be a double boot episode. Yeah. Thanks, CBS and Survivor.
Yeah, thank you for that.
So
it's like they don't think about us or something.
I know. Well, they were waiting. It was like right after we recorded. They're like, now we can put this out there.
Exactly.
Now, we weren't going to obviously record another podcast. So what do I do to communicate other than podcasts?
TikTok, maybe?
TikTok, yes. So we made one of those to update our predictions. And even then, the two of us were thinking along the same lines, still saying Evvie would go, adding in Heather. So we were half right. And it turns out we would have been better off if we hadn't updated the predictions, because then we could have just said, oh, look, we were completely right.
We were definitely right. We had no idea at the time we made our predictions that this was happening. But, and that I want to start there if we could, just because it was something that I mentioned when we were making the TikTok. I don't know if it was included or not, but I really feel like it's interesting how the division went on that particular immunity challenge, to look at who ended up with who. It was almost like the Survivor gods were like, I would like certain people to stay. And because of that, this is how the division is going to turn out with this rock draw. I have a problem with rocks still, but I do feel like it didn't really, I don't think it had the effect that I think Survivor or CBS was hoping for, where they want to shake things up. When it turns out to be lines are already drawn amongst people, and those same people end up in those groups. And so the vote becomes less of a scramble, because you can look at the people you're working with and go, well, I'm with him and I'm with this person over here and they're together over there. So we're good.
Right. And of course, obviously Survivor, plans all this out way ahead of time. And so, but I'm sure that, like you said, when they're thinking about it, they're like, well, if there is a majority alliance, this will help shake things up.
Yeah.
We've discussed it. Taryn Armstrong has discussed it at length for both Big Brother and Survivor. In general, twists almost never shake things up the way the producers want them to. Almost always they make people more conservative.
Yes.
And that is exactly what happened here. Now, is it possible in a single elimination that Evvie could have still been the one who was voted out? Yeah. Evvie doesn't think so. And originally at the beginning of, right after it happened, I was discussing it on Twitter, and I was thinking, well, Evvie might have still gone. As I've thought about it more and seen and heard more interviews and the like, I think Evvie might have been in a better place. We just don't know.
Right.
I mean, we know that, and obviously we don't want to get too much into this now, but we know certain people didn't flip in the small group. Would they have flipped if there was a bigger group?
Right. And that's what I can't stand about these types of twists, because I do think you take away the ability for players to play the game, because you are now shaking things up, but you're really just making it easier for those that are already in control to maintain control.
Right. And I mean, is this the worst twist of ever? No. I mean, they've done this before. Is it even the worst twist? It honestly, for this season, it's not like even top 5 worst, which,
and that's the problem, right? That's where we find ourselves.
Right. Yeah. But yeah, I mean, you still, at least with this, you still have to play the game. It is still playing the game. It's just playing the game with a random group of people. Hopefully you made allies within those groups. Just different allies work differently. And we'll get into all of that.
Sure.
Of course, if going back to our predictions briefly, if things had gone the way Shan originally wanted, we would have been 100% right.
I know. Come on, Ricard.
Yeah.
Help us out just a little bit, okay?
But yeah, I guess we can't claim much credit when people change their minds. But this does lead to the point that was debated on Twitter the night of the episode. Did it make sense for Shan to use her extra vote?
It did not.
Okay, so that's the position you take. I know.
I'm ready for it. I'm ready.
Okay. So first, let me go
I love
through.
when you're so dismissive.
No, I'm not dismissive. I just knew that was the position you had. That's all. If I were dismissive, I'd just turn off your video.
No, that is true. So anyone who's concerned about how he responds, that's what he's going to do. So
that's
just
right.
know this.
That's right. I should have made a chart. I'm looking at my notes here, and I should have made a chart that I could share on the screen for, like X's
a
and
professor.
O's.
Look at you.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But
I could show mine. It's just a bunch of chicken scratch. But.
Okay. But okay. So first, we have the logic that we believe is why she played it. And by we, I don't necessarily mean you and I mean we others. Mike Bloom talked about it. I talked about it. Various other people on Twitter talked about it.
Right.
So we know Ricard was trying to convince Shan and going through different scenarios. He was saying, well, if one vote goes here and two votes go there and this and that and the other thing. So by playing things the way they did, with Shan using the extra vote in one direction and also casting her regular vote in the other direction, it caused the tie. Then, of course, revote goes 100% against Naseer. Okay, fine. But playing the extra vote that way gave backup protection. If Naseer had played his idol, it ends up with at least 2 votes for sure against Heather. So Heather and Erica can't do something sneaky and turn it on Shan or Ricard. If Naseer had played his idol and at the same time Erica and Heather realized they could flip things, well then Ricard and Shan's votes against Naseer would have gotten nullified and one of them could have gone 2-1 if she hadn't used the extra vote. Now, remember Heather's comment that made everybody, gasp at home when Shan said, well, we just want to make sure it doesn't come back at us. And Heather was like, well, it might, and it was like, what are you saying?
Yeah.
So even if Naseer would not play his idol in a situation where Erica and Heather flip, then the situation would have been Shan and Ricard voting Naseer, Naseer voting Heather, Heather and Erica voting Shan or Ricard for a 2-2-1 split. So that's a tie. They got a revote. Naseer likely would have realized that Shan or Ricard tried to vote him out. And therefore, there could have been a revote that resulted in Shan or Ricard being gone. Now, as I say that, even though I've gone over these notes like 4 times, it occurs to me Naseer wouldn't have a vote if Shan and Ricard voted Naseer in this situation. So that part wouldn't have mattered, but it would have just been Heather and Erica voting against Shan or Ricard, and one of them gets voted out. That's where I messed up my notes. Sometimes you have to read your notes just one more time and talk it out. That's the part that I find. So anyway, that's a lot of options to think through.
Oh, it is. But can I jump in?
Absolutely.
Are you done with
I'm still confused by my own notes. So go ahead.
Because here's the situation, right? I think that what has happened, because there has been this idea that it was used correctly. But I think what we're doing is we're looking at the end result. It worked, right? It ultimately worked.
Ultimately it was unnecessary. You could say the opposite.
Yes, but so what I'm saying is we're looking at the end result and they're like, oh no, look, we got Naseer voted out. And so therefore it was a good play. But if you really look at it, they didn't guarantee themselves anything. And the reason being is because they essentially created a tie. But what would have happened if you actually look at it, and what no one I feel is really talking about is the shot in the dark, right?
Right.
Because if Heather had decided, I want to play my shot in the dark, and she did and was successful, who are the votes against? We've got Heather and Naseer. And if Naseer thinks something is wonky and going on, he plays his idol, she gets the shot in the dark, and then guess what? The only 2 people left on the table to then vote for are Ricard and Shan.
Right. And the thing is, you're right. They didn't guarantee anything because there is no way to guarantee the situation you mentioned.
There is one guarantee. There is one guarantee. If Shan wanted to, and this would have been, it would have been crappy all around if this is the decision that she had to make. But if she wanted to guarantee her safety, if everything lines up like that, and worst case scenario, Naseer plays his idol, Heather plays a shot in the dark, what do we have left? I have an extra vote, and I have someone sitting next to me that I can vote for. That's Ricard. So she could have played her extra vote on Ricard, because then if Heather would have gotten the shot in the dark and he would have, and Naseer would have played his idol, then the only vote left standing would have been Ricard, and she would have had to vote out her alliance member, but it would have guaranteed her safety, because then she wouldn't have been on the choppy block to get voted for. But because what ends up happening by creating a tie, you're hoping all of these things are going to exist. You're hoping that Naseer is on your side. You're hoping that Erica and Heather didn't flip and create some other plan. So essentially you're creating a tie, which doesn't necessarily guarantee you anything except that, oh, then we get to revote and then we can focus on who we want. You're forgetting that you have to get there first. And so the only time that, in my mind, and listen, Twitter, tell me if I'm wrong, that I think they will. And I'm sure they will, because I've kind of like, it's a lot of things to process and think through. And trust me, I've been out there and I know it's very difficult to process and think through these things when you are leading up to it at the time. It's incredibly difficult. And Shan and Ricard certainly thought through their options 100%. But it's that other component of the twists that have been added to the game that make it more difficult for you to really think through all of the possibilities. And if you have an extra vote, I feel like the only time that the extra vote really is going to work is when you have an odd number. So you don't want to be using the extra vote when there's 5 of you voting. You want to be using it when there's 4 of you voting or 6 of you voting, because then you can throw off the numbers as far as the votes are concerned. If
so
you're
creating cause an odd number.
Right. Well, right. Okay. You don't want to cause an even number of votes, which is what they essentially did. And this is just my opinion, it makes sense kind of to create a tie because there's the revote, but it doesn't make sense to create a tie when you know that there's a potential idol that can be played and there's a shot in the dark. And so both of the people you're voting for could ultimately become immune, and then you're left there with the other person that you're voting with. So I do think that it's, and also if you know, and again, if we're assuming that they know Naseer is with them, and if we're assuming that Naseer is not with Erica and is not with Heather, then you don't need to use the extra vote because you have 3 votes right there. And I realize that there was an issue voting out Heather versus Naseer, but why use the extra vote if you aren't going to really be able to make the change that you're desirous of making? I know that Ricard and Shan were discussing Heather versus Naseer, and one wanted Heather and one wanted Naseer, but maybe at that point in time, it's more important to save that extra vote for a time that it could have more of an impact and just pick one of the two, because ultimately one of those two you want to have go home at some point anyway, right?
Right.
So we do it now, we do it later. And I don't think Naseer would have been a difficult person to have everyone agree later, he's got to go home, when you know you've got people on the other side that are part of your core alliance who agree with you. They all want Naseer to go home. So why not just settle on Heather, get that done, and then we can work on Naseer later, even though he's got an idol. Naseer is someone who is incredibly loyal and has made it very clear that he's loyal. So he thinks that he's part of that core group. Great. Let him think he's part of that core group. And when you all get back together and you all get to vote together again, then you take Naseer out and you still have your extra vote. So that's kind of where I ended up falling on all of it. It worked for them. And I'm sad that Naseer had to go, but it did work for them. But I was kind of leaning towards, why do that in that instance if you don't need to?
Okay. So here's what I would say to all of that.
Sure.
It's a game of odds.
Right.
You know, you don't know if Naseer is going to play the idol. You don't know if Heather's going to play the shot in the dark. You don't know if Heather and Erica are going to flip.
Right.
And then if Heather does play the shot in the dark, you don't know if she's going to draw the safe.
Right.
So you have to put together the plan that keeps you the most safe. It's kind of like you're on an airplane. The airplane's going down. If you stay on the airplane, odds are pretty good you're not going to make it.
Right.
There's a parachute. Okay. The parachute has a tear in it. Well, if you use the parachute, it might break your fall. Even though it has a tear, it might break your fall just enough so you survive. Which do you do? You know, well, you go for the parachute, you hope for the best. And, and I think that's what happened here was the odds that all of the things would happen that you were discussing are very slim. That Naseer would use his idol, and Heather would play the shot in the dark, and Heather would get that 16.6666667%
Well, right.
chance.
And so then if you are concerned that all of those things are not going to happen, and then if your concern becomes Naseer might play his idol, which means Naseer is not with us. If he's playing his idol, he's not voting with us, which means Heather and Erica have convinced him to do something different. Then you've got 3 people voting against you. At that point in time, you need to use your extra vote, and you need to put all 3 on the same person, that being Heather.
I mean, but by doing it the way they did it, they also guarded against that.
But they didn't, and that's the thing. Because
if by splitting it, well, okay, if Naseer was
I'm
not
talking
with
about
them,
Naseer
you're right. If
and
Naseer
Erica
had
and
flipped,
Heather going together to vote against Ricard or Shan.
right.
So those
if
3
Naseer
decide.
had flipped and used his idol, I think that's where just the game knowledge has to come in. We're not out there with them.
Right. And so that's why I'm kind of like spinning in my brain, like the various options. And with the extra vote, I know that this is one of those issues that a lot of people have discussed, because it seems to be something that has never been used properly, or there's always an issue with it. And I do think that, unfortunately, there's so many computations you have to kind of work through.
Right.
But if you want to guarantee, you're certainly never going to have a guarantee when you play this game, right? Because you are playing the odds. Yes. But I do think that by the way that they played it, they were assuming certain components, that Naseer was not going to join up with Erica and Heather. And that if he played his idol, we've got Heather as a backup. But if you're going to be creating a tie, there's other levels to it, and there's other things that could happen. And so it was just kind of like working through all of those computations, and eventually they got where they needed to get. Right. But I do feel like it's in that situation, based upon what they knew going in, she didn't need to use it because they had enough votes anyway.
Yeah, I think it's a matter of how you feel with certain people. They felt Naseer was completely loyal, because Naseer had been completely loyal.
Right. So then you don't need to use it.
Well, but if Naseer is completely loyal, but still worries just enough to use his idol, and Erica and Heather, who are definitely not completely loyal, they flip, that's when you need the extra vote. So why not use it to keep your game? Because let me tell you.
But if they're all voting for Heather, it doesn't matter. Like if Naseer is like, I'm worried, but I'm voting for Heather. And then you've got
unless
Ricard
she uses her
and
shot in the dark
voting for Heather.
I mean, it is guarding against the unlikely, but not the impossible.
Well, right, but I'm just saying, like, if that's what you're walking in with, going, Naseer is with us 100%, and we know that Naseer is voting for Heather, regardless of whether or not he plays his idol. If the 2 of us vote for Heather, Heather goes home. Period. Right. Done. Doesn't matter.
I mean, it is a matter of debate. There is no calculation.
Oh, for sure. But I mean, so this is just kind of the way I was thinking.
We both went through all the different options, and we came out with different answers, because there is not a hard and fast calculation. What's the percentage chance that Heather and Erica are going to flip? What's the percentage chance combined with, maybe Christian Hubicki needs to do this, assign percentages, put it all on a whiteboard, and then come out with the answer. I mean, yes, it is hard for us sitting here to say how likely or unlikely it was that Heather and Erica would flip. But I'll say one thing. Both people who were actually voted out in this episode, as we will discuss, thought they had allies who would keep them safe.
Yeah.
Okay. Obviously, we'll talk more about that in a bit. But my point is, if you have the means to defend yourself in a potentially dangerous situation, I think you should take it. I mean, there are lots of times when people didn't do things and everybody is like, oh my gosh, why didn't you do that? I mean,
for sure.
Look at Xander.
Yeah.
Look at Evvie's vote. Why didn't people immediately are like, why didn't Xander play the extra vote? Well, because he thought that everything was going to work fine, and he did not guard against another possibility.
Yeah, but in that case too, then you go back, but then it turns into the revote, right? And you have to look at who's left on the revote.
Right.
And I know we're going to get there too, but I think in that situation it's different, because the revote, you're definitely toast because of the way that the numbers are split. I think with where Shan and Ricard were, you had very clear kind of divisions, and you kind of knew where everybody was going to fall on a revote. And I think you could say the same thing with the other group, but that revote would have been against Xander and Evvie because
it would have been a tie. It would have been a tie between Liana and Evvie. And then a revote, it would have been a tie again, presuming nobody changed.
Mm-hmm.
And then it would have been rock draw between Deshaun and Danny.
Well, right.
Because they're the only two people who are left. So.
Yeah, I'm just trying to think where everybody would have ended up in that one too.
Right. Because Xander uses it, and then he gets to use it again.
Well, but does he get to use it again?
Yes.
Have we determined that 100%?
Yes, we have determined that, as was evidenced by the fact that Jeff read 3 votes before saying, Naseer, you're out. And also JD confirmed it. Remember, it was his extra vote way back when. That's why it was all wrinkly when Jeff held it up, because it had been stuffed in JD's pants. Yes. Or out of JD's pants. But yes, it is confirmed that in US Survivor it carries through. Apparently in Australian Survivor it does not.
But hang on. Now I want to spend some time on this one because I'm fascinated. I'm sorry, but I'm fascinated. So you have Deshaun.
Done a separate podcast on that.
I know. Deshaun and Xander and Evvie vote one way.
Deshaun. No, just as assuming he would only play it if he realized that Deshaun was not going to be on his side.
I see. Okay,
so you get Xander,
so that's where you want to create that tie. Mm-hmm.
Right. Xander, Evvie, vote for Liana.
And so this is a great point to make with the difference that's happening in Shan's world, because they believe they have Naseer. So they've already got 3. Whereas Xander thinks there's only 2 of them. They need 3.
No,
so
Xander did think he had Deshaun. The difference was Deshaun didn't go with him.
Right.
And Xander didn't use the extra vote. So that's the thing is, here we are, or not necessarily we, but some people are saying, oh my gosh, Xander, why didn't you do that? And with the Shan and Ricard, some people are saying, oh my gosh, Shan, why did you do that?
Right. But that's my point, is that there are certain times that creating a tie is to your benefit. I don't think that Shan and Ricard needed to create a tie, considering where they knew everyone was going to be voting. Whereas if there's only 2 of you, clearly that's not the majority. So you need to create a tie in that instance. And so Xander could have created a tie if he didn't think he didn't think Deshaun was with him. So that's why I find it interesting. Why create a tie if you don't need to? If you know that you have the votes, don't create the tie, keep it. So Xander should have played it. I don't think Shan needed to play it. So, see, there we are.
Well, it all comes back to if you know that you have the votes.
Well,
you never know that you have the votes.
It's all a guessing game. Listen, trust me, I know.
Exactly
it's a guessing game. I apologize for overthinking everything.
No. I mean, I think that there was a lot of time spent thinking it through. Xander, I think, believed that he had the votes. Evvie, I think, believed that they had the votes.
Right.
But I think that Ricard and Shan are a bit more paranoid / careful. And even though they probably thought that the votes were going to go the right way, they guarded against it. So it's all a matter of how you want to play. If you want to shield yourself from the unlikely or not. I mean,
well, then you play it for Ricard.
Yeah, well,
so you put Ricard's name on. If you're really trying to shield against everything,
right,
you write Ricard's name down. I'm sorry, Ricard. I'm not trying to get you voted out or anything. I'm just saying. Like, if Shan's really like going through all the probabilities or the possibilities.
Yeah. All right. I think we've covered that in depth.
I know. We can move on. I apologize, world.
Yeah. Now, I did think that I had more to say about this episode, but I think that was the main thing that was taking up space in my brain.
That was taking
it was, that whole night, the next day, I was just swirling, and
I fell asleep thinking about she should have just put Ricard's name down.
Now, but there are a few more things to say, obviously, but those will come in the rules. The only other thing that doesn't, for me, involves Danny once again falling out of a challenge fairly early. And I know this is a tough one, but I'm really wondering, is he throwing some of these because he knows he's perfectly safe and he doesn't want to appear to be a threat? Sydney made a comment in an interview about how he was playing up supposedly being hurt or weak earlier in the game. Now, I tweeted about this possibility, and Danny replied just with a laughing emoji.
Well, if you remember, a lot of things that Danny said pregame was how he wanted everyone to recognize the threats as those individuals that are very good at puzzles and are kind of like the nerdy kids who, like the David Wrights of the world, like those are the ones.
Kind of the Evvies,
Yes, like those are the ones you need to be focusing on, not big, brawny, strong people like me. And so I wouldn't be surprised if he's doing that on purpose.
Yeah. Now, like I said, he just gave me a crying laughing emoji. So I don't know if he was laughing because I'm right or because he really did just fall out of those and he wishes that I were right.
Danny,
I don't know.
Give
what
him
it
a
is.
David, you're right, and he will be forever grateful.
That's right. Give me one of these, Danny. Give me one of these. Yeah. So, yes, Danny said on Twitter that we hadn't said anything bad about him yet, and I said,
well, there's no reason to yet. And he's selling shirts too. I will say there. Yes. I noticed he's got some merch. So
yes, he does. He's had that since before the show began.
I know. I didn't realize it until very recently. So yes, that was. So Danny's got some merch. You can get on that. Yeah, Danny's killing it. He's definitely. He is one that I'm happily surprised because when you have professional athletes come in and play, I do feel like sometimes their personas can kind of overtake them in the game. And it doesn't seem like it has. I mean, it was mentioned once at Tribal Council, but, Danny didn't really get too into the weeds with it. And I just feel like he's really kind of kept it in check. And I really think that has to do with how he was raised and where he came from. He's got a really incredible backstory. And so it's kind of leveled him out a little bit. Like he hasn't allowed anything.
He's more humble than some athletes when they come in with their big complexes.
Yeah, and I really and not to speak ill of any professional athletes that have played, but I do think that it kind of puts you just in a different mindset because you are very competitive and you're also like you're kind of used to that world that you're living in, which is very intense and very fast-paced and incredible, and then you get on Survivor and it's hard, I think, to kind of like turn that off. And I do think that we see people from other professions have the same type of issues when they go out there. So I wasn't sure how Danny was going to fit himself into this world. I figured he was going to kill it in challenges because he was very strong, but I really appreciate how he's coming across as just kind of a very humble individual who is willing to like have a lot of great conversations and talk through things and not go at things at an intensity that you would expect to see coming from someone who lives such an intense world that, in his everyday life. So I've been very impressed with how he's been playing the game.
Yeah. Yeah. Now you mentioned that Danny sells merch. Well, you know who else sells merch? Us.
We do.
Crazy. And so you can go to robhasawebsite.com/YXLostFeed and you can get things like the rules in poster form.
That's right. Right back here. I got some.
Yeah. And so you can click on that link right there and it'll take you. You can order the poster there. Or if you're outside the US, of course, you could just DM Jessica.
Yes, you can. And I should just throw this out there. Australia is not allowing me to ship anything to Australia.
Okay. Well,
just throwing that out there. Andrew, I'm so sorry. So that's
we'll keep an eye on that and hopefully we'll find a way around those Australian anti-poster laws. I don't know. Anyway, also we can we have the poster on a shirt. And
on a mug. There's one on a mug too.
Yes. And then, of course, we have the checklist t-shirt, which you can see partially that I'm wearing. And there you can see it there. Now, I'm wearing this in honor of Sophie on the RHAP podcast saying that you need to create a checklist before going out to Survivor. You can just wear a checklist going out to Survivor or put it on a mug and there you go. We've taken care of it.
Yeah. So it'd be funny if you were walking around Ponderosa wearing one of those pregame. Yeah.
That might make you a target. I'm just saying.
It might not be good.
Someone like Danny might say, that person looks like a Survivor nerd.
Right. Exactly. Maybe we should target that person.
Yeah. So, but don't blame us.
No, not our fault.
Buy the stuff, but don't blame us.
Yeah.
And I believe that for patrons of RHAP, there will be a Black Friday code coming soon. So that would be a good time to do it.
Black Friday. Good stuff.
So for the shirts, the mugs, that sort of thing, sweatshirts. All right. So that's all I have. If you don't have anything, we can move on.
Listen, we're 35 minutes in. We have 2 people to talk about. Let's go.
Yes. All right. So in their Ponderosa video, Naseer and Evvie said viewers would be very, very upset to see 2 popular players voted out in the same night. And they were right.
They were.
This isn't a popularity contest, at least not one that involves viewers. Indeed, sometimes, as I mentioned earlier, popularity can be a curse. Was that the case here, or were there other more important factors involved? Also, with battles raging between the core alliance and those outside it, as well as temperatures rising within that main group, did people make the right choice in getting rid of these 2? Or is it going to end up dooming at least some of them? Let's look at all of this and more as we figure out why Naseer and Evvie lost. The first and most important rule talks about the need to scheme and plot. Both Evvie and Naseer are big fans of the game, so they certainly know how important this was. I do think Evvie relied on this facet a bit more than Naseer. We mentioned last week how Tiffany and Evvie were a ride-or-die duo, and also how Evvie at one point had both Xander and Liana in their pocket, though both of those obviously changed. That wasn't all. Evvie was allies with pretty much everyone since the beginning of Yase, and in that middle position, and therefore able to choose who went when the tribe had their second vote. Evvie noted at the time that they could be swapped and then bonds would be more important than challenge strength, which was a reference to keeping Tiffany, even though she hadn't done great on that recent challenge. But even after Evvie voted out Voce, Xander still believed Evvie was his number 1 because Evvie pretended to be super close with him so he wouldn't play his idol if they ever went back to tribal council. And Evvie told Dalton Ross that they were still close enough to Liana before Erica did the hourglass smashing that Liana actually told Evvie about the knowledge is power advantage, which goes back to answer some of the questions like, why would Liana think that was okay?
Yeah, I do think that Evvie did an incredible job in preparing all of those relationships, because it's a difficult thing to be mindful of who did I say to what, or what did I say to who, I guess should be the better way to, because that's a hard thing when you are having conversations with multiple people and you're trying to maintain relationships with multiple people, that it not blow back on you. And we kind of saw that happen to her when so she had the conversation with Deshawn when they were at the
Evvie did it, Chippewa Island.
Yes, the Too Many Advantage Island.
Yeah.
And that conversation was one where they each agreed they were going to work together, right? And then all of a sudden, here we are at Tribal Council, and Deshawn is like, hang on a second, I'm going to air some of your dirty laundry here about what you shared with me about Xander. And so that right there is a perfect example of how difficult it can be to maintain those conversations and relationships. You're always hoping that whoever you speak to is going to have your back. But Evvie really did a great job in maintaining that for as long as she could. And it was really impressive to see how Evvie was able to keep everyone in check the way that she did and kind of controlling what was transpiring. But at the same time, unfortunately, once she got to the merge and things were happening, then all of a sudden, Evvie wasn't able to do it as well as she did at the beginning of the game.
Yeah, I mean, in many ways, early on, Evvie was similar to Shan, except that Yase only had to vote out 2 people, while Ua had to vote out 4. If Yase had to go to a couple more tribal councils, I could totally have seen Evvie and Tiffany being the 2 who survived to the merge for much the same reason that Shan and Ricard did. A tight duo with everyone believing one of them was truly their number 1 ally. Indeed, Evvie told Mike Bloom it was like Evvie, Shan, and Deshawn were playing the same game on each of their own tribes.
Right.
And then, you mentioned Too Many Advantage Island. The question in my mind, did Deshawn ever truly see that as a possibility? They agreed at the beginning of this episode not to vote for each other, and that sure didn't last long. But Evvie said in interviews that it was because Danny was on the split tribe with them, and he wanted to keep things on the straight and, narrow path to the end. I do think Deshaun was mad at Shan. He probably still is mad.
Mm-hmm.
But I just don't think he was so mad that he was willing to throw away his game to vote out one of Shan's allies. Just like he wouldn't, instantaneously flip on Heather at the drop of a hat, he also had to think things through with the core alliance. He probably wanted to keep Evvie around as a side alliance to give himself flexibility.
Mm-hmm.
But when they were broken into those groups, there just wasn't much he could do without causing complete implosion of the alliance if he were to vote out Liana.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that, but I also feel like, and maybe this isn't the best time to discuss it, but I'm going to discuss it. Because we're talking about Deshaun and the decision that he made to not flip on Liana at that point. And I understand his concern with Shan and Ricard and where people are at on the other side, but those outliers, those people who don't necessarily have a place or aren't part of the core alliance, can become your ability to flip the entire game on its head.
Right.
And maybe you no longer want to work with the people who are in your core alliance. And how are you ever going to flip on those people if you don't ever flip on those people? And so you need those outliers to actually do it. And so that could have been a moment for Deshaun. And I'm sure this was a conversation he had with himself. Is this the moment to do that? But maybe he needed to, because you're losing two people, right? There are two people going home, and those two people are likely going to be the outliers that you might need later in order to vote against people within your core alliance. So to start breaking down that wall, maybe this would have been the time for him to do so. And then you have an opportunity to work with those new individuals that you've now brought into the fold. And now you are in control, as opposed to having to listen to what Shan is telling you to do, which is clearly annoying him, right?
Yeah. And I think that I will address more of that in our predictions.
Okay.
But I do think that this is one place where the split vote hurt.
Oh, yeah.
Because he could not even talk to the other people. Like, he didn't know what was going on the other side.
Right.
So even though he showed up and, it was a certain way, well, by then, they knew that Naseer was on the jury, but he didn't know how that happened.
Right.
And so it was a situation where, does he know if Heather and Erica are willing to work with him? He doesn't. So the most conservative thing, and this is what we talked about earlier, is to just stick with your alliance until you can talk to more people.
Yeah. And I'm not saying that that should have been handled differently, but that's part of that conversation, is trying to, like, long term, where do I see myself working with people and managing to change the game?
Right.
Yeah.
Now, credit to Evvie in that they really did feel like they had a good bond with Deshaun, and even told Rob that part of the plan was not only to get Deshaun aiming at Liana, but Liana firing back to cause a rift. Deshaun and Liana just didn't fall for the plan, and Deshaun out-schemed Evvie.
Yeah, unfortunately.
So now, I mentioned earlier that Naseer didn't seem to rely on this rule as much as Evvie. His bond seemed to be the more social type. He didn't seem to specifically make allies and backups and the like, as Evvie did, but rather there were those he trusted and those he didn't. For example, he said in interviews that pre-merge, he, Deshaun, and Danny became close. They had some ups and downs, but they built an alliance. The thing is, I'm not sure how solid it was as an alliance, but rather maybe as three people who were friendly with one another.
Right. Well, and I think too, he came out of the gate kind of strategizing like heavy, like day one, throwing people under the bus. And that information immediately came back on him. And he thought, and he talked about this in some of his exit interviews, that, oh, well, this is what you do. You go out there and you start playing the game and you talk to people about things that happen, and then realized, whoa, timeout. Apparently you don't do this.
Well, hold on. I'm going into Rule 2 territory here. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So I do think that he wanted to strategize, but that probably hindered his ability to do so quickly, because he saw such backlash almost immediately. You walk into the game thinking this is what you have to do and this is how you have to play. And then you kind of get a slap on the wrist, like, no, you need to slow your roll. And so I think that caused him to kind of step back a little bit and rethink how he was playing the game, and then started to rely more upon his personality and what he could bring to the tribe as opposed to strategy. Other things took precedent and took, and instead of him being like, I want to strategize, because he had kind of gotten knocked down at the beginning.
Right. I mean, he did try to make some other allies, and again, he got knocked down. He tried to work with Erica and Heather, who were very close, which we didn't know until this episode, even though it was episode 9. And
everyone is talking about it now.
Yeah, it's like all of a sudden, oh yeah, we're super close. Oh yeah, they're a duo. And it's like, oh, something that would have been nice to know.
It's great. Thank you, CBS.
Yeah. But he said he tried to talk to Erica for almost 11 days, and she didn't want to talk to anybody or form an alliance at all, which is one reason Danny and Deshaun wanted to throw that challenge to get rid of her. It's interesting because it makes me wonder why people thought she was sneaky, if she was being literally the opposite of sneaky and refusing to form alliances. Now, often on Survivor, it's good to presume if that person doesn't want to make an alliance with me, it means they're making alliances with everyone else. So maybe that's why everyone thought it, because, but then if all of them talk and realize that, then where do you get sneaky from? I don't know. But anyway, similarly, he said Heather was hard to talk to and you couldn't sit down for even 10 minutes to talk to her. So how could you form an alliance with her?
Right. Yeah. And he called her confused.
Yes. Now, at the merge, Naseer analyzed the strategic possibilities and explained in his interview with Rob how he looked at how things could fit together. For example, he could try to go with Yase, but they were imploding, so there was no group to latch on to. He bonded quickly with Shan and Ricard, and he trusted them, even saying on the show they were his closest allies. He felt that Shan had confided in him, even going so far as to say that she didn't trust Ricard. And that made him think there was a crack there. But I suspect that was all gameplay on the part of the UA duo. And we have a similar situation to Evvie, where Naseer got out schemed.
Yeah, and I do think that Naseer, and I'm sure we're going to be talking about this, but I really think that he was looking at the game just in a much different way. I mean, I think Evvie was spending a lot of time being more calculated and kind of working through the options that were present, whereas Naseer kind of shut down once he realized, oh, wait, I'm not supposed to do that. People don't like me. And so I need to kind of switch things up, which he did. But unfortunately, I do think that caused him to be left out of things and not be as included, and was more willing to just go along with what was happening because I don't want to rock the boat and I don't want to push things too soon. Whereas I feel like Evvie was more in control of the decisions that were being made early on, because the reaction to Evvie doing it was much different than the reaction that Naseer had to it. If that makes sense.
Yeah. All right, we can move on to rule 2, which says not to scheme and plot too much and to keep your scheming secret. Now, continuing with Naseer, you already brought up, we saw him push a bit too hard right from the get-go when he caught Danny and Deshaun looking for idols and then proceeded to tell everyone, which caused Sydney to tattle on him to the people that he was tattling on.
Right.
We saw things like this happen a few times, but he said in interviews that at least one of those times he purposely told Sydney something to prove that she would go running back to the person that he said it about.
Well, and that's fair. That's a great strategy to try to use when you're out there, but you also need to understand the dynamics and the relationships of the people that you are kind of testing in that moment. And if Sydney is more aligned to someone else and you're sharing information about that person, well, of course, it makes sense for her to then be like, guess what? Naseer's talking about you.
Right.
So, and then it just puts Naseer in a bad way, because even though he's trying to test Sydney, you're basically proving to the other person that you're talking about them. And then you're telling that person, well, no, but you can't trust Sydney because she told you.
Right.
It might not spin out the way that you want it to.
Yes. And I don't think he realized how close Sydney was to Danny and Deshawn.
Right.
We joked at the time, Naseer was in trouble, then he was safe, then he was in trouble, then he was safe. But, the funny thing is none of that ended up mattering at the time because Love You never had to go to tribal council.
Right.
Now, Sydney did say a couple things in interviews about the way he was acting, and I do wonder if some of that carried to the merge. She told Mike Bloom, I cannot go on with like Naseer running around for no reason like a mad person. And she told Rob, Naseer was erratic and hard to be around for strategy. We also saw him in this episode directly confronting Heather. Now, he did it nicely, but it was a direct confrontation after the last tribal council. So, that sort of thing, being willing to kind of air everything out may be part of what made others worry about him.
That was such an incredible scene.
It was, it's like, you voted for me. No, I didn't. I just threw your name out.
Yeah. Wait.
That's
Evvie,
worse.
what did I tell you to do? You told me to put Naseer's name down.
Yeah, I know. Yeah. Like, what did you think was going to happen there?
I know.
Did you think that Evvie was just going to back you?
Yeah.
Yeah, that was
totally. That's it. Sorry, Heather. You're done getting thrown onto the bus. That's not the way to handle that moment right there.
Right. Yeah. Well, I didn't write your name down. I just told everybody else in the tribe to write your name down.
Yeah.
And then I got overruled, so I didn't do it.
It's fascinating.
Yeah. Now, moving to Evvie, they said on the show that they went on the relationship recovery tour because they were playing too hard. I'm not sure that I saw it that way. Even when Evvie said that, I was like, but are you? Yes, Evvie did spill the Xander beans to Deshawn, and then Deshawn told everybody else. But was that really the big problem? Xander acted like he was upset, but I think I saw in one interview that he acknowledged, at least to her, that a lot of it was acting so he could show that he was on his own, like he was playing it up.
Well, and you end up in a really difficult spot when you are on the bottom. There's a clear moment where everyone knows who's on the bottom. And the decisions that you have made in your game can be negatively viewed by other people playing the game. Knowing you're on the bottom, you want to use that information and try to flip it and fix it. So I don't think that Evvie was necessarily on a recovery tour, but I do think that it was damage control.
Well, that's what they called it.
And yes, Evvie called it that. And I don't think that that's the wrong way to explain it, but I do think that it's also damage control, where you're reading the room, you're looking at, okay, I'm clearly at the bottom. I need to do something here. And in order to do something, that's going to require that I have conversations with people.
Right.
And I acknowledge things that I've done. Very smart gameplay for sure, because you are trying to fix things that have happened and potentially avoid things from happening later by doing that damage control up front.
Right. Now, the real kicker about, spilling the beans on Xander was that Evvie never intended for it to matter because they told Mike Bloom, I really did think Xander was going home that day because I had floated Voce's name out and they already said no. Also, even if we did somehow keep Xander, there was no way we were going to win all the challenges. Up to that point, we had not even come in second place. We were dead last in every challenge. If you had told me on that day, oh, you're never going to lose a challenge again, I would never have ever believed it. So it definitely seemed like a problem that wasn't going to come back and bite me. So I guess in this case, I would call it accidentally not keeping their scheming secret.
Yeah. But again, Evvie was playing long-term, looking ahead and looking at the potential options and where the game was going. And everything that they just said makes sense because that's what Evvie was doing with her game. She was thinking ahead, right?
Right. All right. The third rule tells players to be flexible. We already discussed how Evvie was in the center of all the Yase alliances. We've talked about that. We talked about it in the first couple of podcasts for the season. And I had even picked Evvie as my star for this rule in our Why Nobody Lost podcast for that exact reason. This was no accident, as Evvie told Mike Bloom, My strategy going into the game was always to try to keep as many options open as possible. So even though I thought of Xander as a fake alliance at Yase, I thought I should make it a really good fake alliance to leave that as an option.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I do think that Evvie was phenomenal in this regard. Really talking to as many people that was necessary, and as indicated in every interview, keeping options open, period.
Mm-hmm. Right. Now, as for Naseer, I think he tried to be flexible and keep his options open. I mean, even though I mentioned the way he confronted Heather after she tried to vote him out, what he was trying to say there, I think, was that he was willing to forgive her and move forward. It was just one vote. It happened. Now, we know there are some people on Survivor who, if you vote for them one time, you're dead to them. Mm-hmm. So him telling Heather, I mean, sometimes not even if you vote for them, if you vote for their close ally, then they target you the whole game. Not that you would know anything about that. That would never happen to you.
Never happened.
So, him telling Heather that it was okay and they could move past it showed a lot of flexibility, even though none of it ended up coming to fruition.
Yeah. And I do think that for Naseer, the unfortunate component about this game is you are playing the game with other people, right? And I think that one of the struggles that we saw was that particular conversation. And then in listening to him talk in his, in his exit press, Heather was frustrating. And he unfortunately had to play the game with Heather, especially once that split happened and the 5 are over here and 5 are over here. He had no choice. Heather was there. And what we've learned now is Erica and Heather were close. So now he's in a position where he has to play with Erica and Heather if he wants to do anything different than going with Shannon Ricard. And it puts you in a very difficult spot if you find yourself playing with people who you've called confusing and who are very difficult to talk to. You've got Erica who doesn't want to talk to you at all. And I do feel for him in that moment because while he might have been trying to be flexible and trying to keep his options open, you're so limited because you're stuck with the people you're playing with.
Right. Yeah, you don't get to choose who you're there with.
No, and
especially in this case. Yeah. Now, I do also think that Evvie mentioned in interviews that Naseer was somewhat interested in working with them. And indeed, I noted earlier that if Yase had stayed together, he might have gone with them. Things just didn't work out that way. It would have been good flexibility for both of them, and it worked for neither of them. All right. The fourth rule tells players not to let their emotions control them. How do you think Evvie did here?
Incredibly well, considering where Evvie found herself at the bottom and really becoming the focal point of so many people on the tribe. Both at the beginning, as we talked about, Evvie was really running the show, managing a lot of relationships, managing a lot of people. And I think in order to do that, you have to keep your emotions in check because you can't be making decisions based upon emotion. You have to be making decisions based upon what is best for your game, which we saw Evvie do time and time again. Then once we get to the merge, there's this issue with Yase, Xander, what's happening with those relationships. And I do think that Evvie did a really incredible job trying to manage more relationships with all of that baggage that was attached to Yase, and didn't end up really focusing on the emotional component, even though she was using emotional connections by having conversations with people. It was more strategy and gameplay. So I do think that Evvie did a great job keeping her emotions in check, considering where Evvie was in the tribe.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, while Evvie certainly has a big heart, they knew that this was Survivor, and that meant cutting people, even if they were friends with them or played up being a big sister or, to the little brother, whatever. And Evvie even used emotions in that way when it came to keeping Xander close. We talked about that. So, yeah, I agree with what you said there. So moving on, how do you think how do you think Naseer did?
Oh, my gosh. Here's the thing with Naseer. He is the type of individual that I think wears his emotions on his sleeve, on his face, everywhere you can imagine. So, and it's interesting though, because I don't know that he necessarily allowed that to control what was happening and the decisions he was making, but it was very apparent. I think that he's someone who is much more in tune, not only to himself, but also the environment and things happening around him. Like the conversation we saw that he had with Heather, where he was having a heart-to-heart kind of moment with her, but in the game world, it wasn't having the response that he wanted it to have. So I do think that he's someone who probably struggled with this because he is an emotional person, and I think he connects with people emotionally. But when you're playing Survivor, sometimes you have to do that, but also remember there's a strategy component to it. And I think that's part of the reason why we saw him kind of falter at the beginning, because he tried to play the game, realized he was going to get a little bit of backlash for it, and then kind of pulled back. And I think that was an emotional response to what was happening to him in that moment.
Yeah. I mean, he was also someone who played with all his heart, but also understood it was a game. And I do think where he faltered a little bit was in trusting Shan too much, but so did almost everyone on UA. So I credit her for that rather than blaming him.
Right. I mean, and I'm not blaming him. Right. I'm not blaming him. I do think that this is one of those situations where you have to have a good understanding of yourself, and he clearly does. But when you're playing Survivor, it's very difficult to turn that emotional component of you off. And I think some people that are playing now, we've seen, are able to do that really, really well. And I think other people that we've seen aren't able to do it. And it's just, it's an individual thing for every person. And I just think that he's someone who is more emotional, and it's got to be a difficult thing to just all of a sudden shut that down and be like a boss out there. I don't think that's Naseer. I just don't think like that's Naseer.
Yeah. Well, and continuing with Naseer into the fifth rule, it's all about the social game and reminds players they need to pretend to be nice. I think in the history of Survivor double eliminations in a single night, these two might be the nicest duo to ever have that happen to them.
Yes.
But even so, there was some pretending going on as well. And I think this is what you were alluding to earlier, because Naseer told Mike Bloom that when he felt like when he was on the bottom, he said, I wanted to be the happiest kid out there. I was the happiest camper, so it would make them go crazy. Like, he doesn't have the numbers. Why is he so happy? I didn't want to show them that I was in the know. I found an idol. I provided for them. I'm not throwing a tantrum and saying, no, you guys don't know how to take care of yourself. I will find food. I'll cook it for you. I will catch crabs. I will do everything for you.
Yeah. It's really a fascinating concept that he created, where it was, I will just be so goddamn happy the entire time I'm out there. I will never complain. And he would say things too that I was shocked. He was so sure of himself, like at Tribal Council. I was going to win that challenge. I was going to win, but I stepped down, and he explained why he was going to win. I think he had flat feet and chicken legs or something.
I've got to say, I didn't understand that. Naseer explained that to me, because this was the prior one where he stepped out and he said, I've got flat feet and chicken legs, so I would have won that challenge. It seems to me, if you have flat feet, then, and you're standing on your toes, that would make it worse, because your feet are not, meant to do that. And if you have chicken legs, then that means you don't have as many muscles in your leg. I don't understand this year. Explain that one to me.
He needs to, because I don't either. Maybe his wife can help us on Twitter. Maybe she can.
Well, he's on Twitter too,
I know, but I do appreciate the comments from his wife.
Yes.
And he did give her full-on permission. So we're curious.
That's right.
But I think that adds to the endearing nature of Naseer. And I think that very few people playing Survivor could probably pull that off, just being so overly happy. But I do think that he was almost overcorrecting from what started at the beginning, because the Naseer we saw day one was certainly not the Naseer that we saw on day, what are they, 18 now at this point? I don't even know like how many days there that have gone by.
Sounds about right.
Yeah, I think it's like day
18, 19, something like that.
So it's a natural thing for Naseer to be this emotional person, to be this nice person. He certainly doesn't need to pretend. But then he played it up, which I think is incredible, that he was like, it's going to come across very natural for me because I'm like this, but it's going to be extra because this is part of my game. So it's funny to see that he was able to develop that component of himself into part of his gameplay. But unfortunately, I think we're going to get to why that didn't work out for him.
Yeah. But first, we'll talk about Evvie in terms of this rule, because we already talked about how they were playing nice, or playing up being nice to Xander in order to keep him comfortable. But it went beyond that to pretty much everyone in the game. Sydney said in her interview with Dalton Ross that Evvie and also Deshawn were so likable. They're great orators. They're just really gregarious people.
Yes.
And, and so, that was part of it. Now, this leads directly into the 6th rule about being too much of a threat.
Yes.
That quote I just gave from Sydney about how likable Evvie was, well, it was prefaced with her saying that was the reason Evvie's name was out as a possible target at the merge.
Yes.
Evvie was so likable as to be worrisome to people. But it went beyond that, as Danny kept saying that Evvie was really dangerous, keeping Deshawn focused in that direction. We alluded to that earlier in the podcast. And Shan previously called out Evvie as a big threat too, noting that they were strategic and a super fan. And, it probably didn't help matters when Evvie showed how big a super fan they were in almost instantly solving the puzzle they'd practiced at home just before coming to the show.
Yeah, and then announcing it.
Yes. Yeah, Jeff's like, wow, that was brilliant. And Evvie's like, I just memorized it,
Yeah, I actually built it at home. Yeah. And then here it is. I did it. Yeah. I do think that Evvie was one of those individuals that you can feel is a threat across the board in so many regards. The strategy component we've already talked about. Clearly an incredibly smart individual, PhD, right? So that's a big
just
component.
Got it. Yeah, that was an interesting day for them. First you get your diploma, showing that you got your PhD. And on that same day is your boot episode.
I know.
It's like the TikTok trend. I'm so happy. I'm so sad.
You got to get your TikTok in there. You should have done that one. That would have been good.
I
Evvie, there's an idea.
That's right. Hey, Evvie's TikToks, they're some of the most popular, or
they really are.
The TikToks that I have done involving Evvie. So
yeah, and Evvie was really just very impressive all around. And I do think that the fact that you have someone like Danny pushing that narrative is certainly not helpful for Evvie either, because it's very difficult to get away from perception. And we've talked about this a lot. Perception is reality on Survivor. And if Danny wants everyone to perceive her as a huge threat, and that's the narrative that he continues to provide regarding Evvie, then how do you fix that if you're Evvie? Clearly her game is speaking volumes with what we've seen. And then to have the instance that we just talked about with the puzzle, blowing that up in 3 seconds, solving it, explaining why. I do think that all around, Evvie found herself in a very difficult spot, because how do you stop what is being said about you as the narrative, and then they see it by how the game is being played by Evvie at the same time? It's a really, really tough spot to be in.
Yeah. Now, Naseer was a threat for some of the same reasons. He's an incredibly friendly super fan. He said at the very beginning of the game, I learned English by watching this show, by watching you, Jeff. On top of that, he single-handedly won 2 tribal immunity challenges earlier in the game, including one they were trying to throw.
Yes.
And of course, he had that idol. He said in interviews that if they would have let him stay this time, and this does go back to something you said earlier, by the way, because you said, well, Naseer, everyone wants to get rid of him, so you can get rid of him at any time. But what he was saying was, if they would have let him stay this time, he could have won an immunity or used his idol to ensure he stuck around at least the next vote, and possibly more, making him dangerous. And I'm sure they were thinking the same thing about him. Like, well, if we don't blindside him, then he gets to stay at least 2 more.
Right.
And, this was especially true from Ricard's perspective, as he took the same position in this episode as Tiffany did after she was voted out. Now, maybe she had this reverberating effect on Ricard, why target the person who isn't currently a threat? Well, he is currently a threat. We said it on last week's podcast, and then Jeff echoed what we said as well. So that's a butterfly effect. We impacted what Jeff was saying. See, butterflies are not dead relatives speaking to you. It's us speaking to you in the past. That's what butterflies are.
Broccolis are not little trees either.
I for a long time I thought they were. So I got to go with that one. But anyway, so Jeff echoed, that normally you target someone who has an idol or advantage to flush it and or them. But this season has been different.
Right.
Ricard brought things back to the way they normally work and really probably should be.
Yeah, and I do think that for Naseer, it's the same thing as Evvie. There's that combination of things that is happening. But in addition to being likable, clearly being great at the challenges, being a provider, he also did have an idol. And so it is interesting to see that Ricard was reminding everyone that normally this is what we do. Normally we want to flush idols. This should be our focus. Heather's not going to be a problem. Let's try to focus on Naseer. And so he did become a really big threat. And I think it's worth pointing out here too, that this is another problem with this particular season. And he talked about it in his exit press. Everyone knew he had an idol. You couldn't hide it, which I think is unfortunate for someone like Naseer, who's already seen as a really likable person and great at challenges and someone that we're going to have to deal with. But now we also know he has an idol. And why do we know he has an idol? Because he had to announce it to the whole world that he had an idol. And so I think that puts him in a really unfair position, because instead of him being able to keep it a secret like he did for so long and like he wanted to be able to do, he had planned to keep an idol a secret if he found it, which is exactly what he did until he had to announce it. So, again, I think that worked out very poorly for Naseer, because it did put more of a target on his back, as opposed to being able to just have it in an aha moment and nobody knew that he had it. We didn't get to see that.
Right. Exactly. I mean, Jeff, come on, Jeff Probst. Why does everyone know that where all the idols are?
I can't imagine.
Yeah, as I, said in my TikTok, because of you, Jeff.
Yeah. Because you made them all wear a sign on top of their head.
Yes. All right. Now, I also add to the threat level here. Naseer sticking around was also a direct threat to Heather and therefore Erica, because he was the alternate option to her. I mean, so as soon as it was put out there, hey, let's change things up so that Heather doesn't have to go. Of course, those two were right on board with getting rid of him, because sure. Otherwise, Heather was gone.
Yeah, and I do think that the conversation between Heather and Naseer probably didn't help, because Heather was already focusing on Naseer. And so that name is already one that's in her mind. And then here comes Naseer kind of calling her out on it.
Yeah.
So this idea that they are potentially going to work together, I do think that was a narrative that's being built in as well, that their names are being dropped at the same time. And so, of course, you want to go with the other person.
Right. All right. Well, we were talking about idols a little bit, and the seventh rule covers idols and advantages, including how to handle and deal with them. Naseer, as we've already started talking about, found the final piece of the three-way idol. And as you brought up, he vowed, he said in interviews that he had vowed not to tell anyone. And he didn't until he found out from Ricard that pretty much everyone knew about the other idols, and therefore his own. So he had to tell his own tribal allies from Loveview, because they were like the only ones not in the know, and you can't have that. You can't have your own allies being the only ones who don't know.
Yeah, but I still hate that whole structure.
Now, of course, we know Naseer obviously didn't play his idol when he needed to. As he told Mike Bloom, that is the only day I really trusted someone. And it made sense. He was loyal. He had a relationship with Shan. Shan wanted to vote out Heather at the last tribal council. It all seemed so simple. But that was what made Ricard's move even better.
Yeah.
He said he needed Naseer to feel so comfortable that he wouldn't play his idol. This was the perfect time for that to happen. And I suspect that was a big part of how he convinced Shan to go along with the plan, was outlining, if we do it now, he has no idea. If we wait, then it goes back to what I talked about earlier. He can stick around another 1, 2, or more tribal councils. And so, Ricard, we saw not real great at getting Xander to flush the idol previously, but he is clearly good at getting someone to not play the idol.
Yes. Yes. He did a great job. And this is, an interesting thing. You already mentioned it. Naseer did say that this is like the most comfortable he had ever felt going into a tribal council. So that brings me back to you don't need to waste the extra vote because you've got Naseer kind of thing. But regardless, I do think that this is a great reminder for anyone who wants to play Survivor. When you feel comfortable is when you really need to start being the most concerned with what's transpiring. And kudos to Ricard for making him feel that way, because they were able to vote him out and get rid of the idol at the same time. So, they were able to kind of kill two birds with one stone. But yes, it is interesting that they were so good at making him feel comfortable that he ended up not playing it. And his idea makes sense. If I save it now, I can play it again next time. But unfortunately, you have to get to the next time in order to play it. And he's obviously not able to.
Right. As far as Evvie, well, they had their trip to Too Many Advantages Island and gave Deshaun his extra vote, which he later proceeded to use to try to vote Evvie out. Now, if nothing else, that gave me the material to turn into what is currently my most popular TikTok still.
Oh my God, you and your TikToks. Here we go.
Well, hey, it's that's going on the out of context, I guarantee it. But and also that's just barely ahead of Evvie singing the hit single "I Slept in the Dirt." So, as I mentioned before, TikToks with Evvie in them are popular.
Yes.
Or at least as popular as mine get. We're not
when
getting.
When it comes to David Bloomberg's TikToks.
Right. But how does that play with Rule 7? It really didn't. I mean, it's that was really the only interaction that they had with the, with advantages and idols and everything, other than, of course, Evvie and Tiffany, we already discussed last time, were really the masterminds behind the plan for Xander to fake out Liana.
Yes, and I have to give Naseer some credit because in his exit press, he clarified that was not Xander that worked that whole thing out, that was Tiffany and Evvie, and he wanted to make sure that they got the props that they deserved for what they did to pull that move off. Sorry, Xander. I still think it was amazing, but Evvie and Tiffany really deserve credit for what they did there. So that is to Evvie's credit that they were able to put that together and pull that off in the manner in which it was done. I do wish that Evvie had pushed a little harder on Xander regarding the idol that didn't get played last night, or the extra vote that didn't, I say last night on, the episode that we watched so many nights ago. But it would have been nice for her to do that. But at the same time, I think that there was a belief, and we've already discussed it, that Deshaun was going to vote with them. And so it didn't matter. And so that wasn't why it was really pushed. And I also kind of understand from Xander's perspective, because he's going to need that damn idol coming up really soon. So for him, it makes sense to keep it as part of his game, but he's also lost a potential, alliance member in the process.
Yeah. And I think Evvie said in at least one of their interviews that it was, I'm trying to think of exactly what that they didn't want to push too hard on Xander because that was still tenuous. I mean, remember they had already split apart once and then come back together. Right. So do you really want to push too hard and risk alienating him entirely?
Right. Yeah.
So, all right, we can move on to Appendix A, which is about the tribe keeping their end goals in mind when voting. we talk about voting out the weak and the strong and the weak and the strong. At this point in the game, the major alliance should be getting rid of those on the outside. And that's exactly what happened here. They are doing the right thing. On the other hand, those on the outside should be trying to knock out the major alliance. And there were a couple of seriously missed opportunities.
Yep.
Before the split, Xander and Erica saw the core alliance just get up and walk over to have their own conversation and said, oh, we should talk to the other people who aren't in that group about joining together. But it never happened, even though they could have done it. In the first tribal council, Naseer, Erica, and Heather could have come together to put up a fight against Shannon Ricard. The problem was, and this is often the problem when, to us on the outside, watching, it's obvious who's on the inside and who's on the outside. To the people in the game, not always the case. Naseer, we already talked about, Naseer was beholden to Shan. He thought that this, Shannon Ricard were his number one allies. Now, Naseer, not the first person to think Shan was his number one ally.
Right.
And so that's why he would never join with Erica and Heather, even though he had spent a lot of time with them. They had never shown any interest.
Right. Yeah.
So that right there, that's one person who isn't going to join with the outsiders.
Yeah. And I think it's hard though, because Naseer was putting so much faith into one person that sometimes you have to start questioning, okay, if I put all of my eggs in this basket over here, where does that put me in that group of people? And I think that his hope was, even though he realized out of that core group, he's kind of on the outside, that he could win his way to the end. That was the sense I got in watching his exit press, was there was this idea that, well, I have my idol, and so that'll get me one more further, and then I'll win an immunity challenge, and then that will keep me around. If we get to 4, I'm winning fire because I can beat anyone in making fire. And then if I get to 3, I'm winning the whole game.
I love this quote of, I can just look at Flint and a machete and it starts on fire.
Right. Very sure of himself, which I think is awesome. But unfortunately, that's hoping that too many things line up and turn out the way that you want it to, as opposed to really taking control of your game. And that's what Naseer missed out on, is if I go over here, I might be able to actually run the show and be on the top as opposed to the bottom. And then I don't need to win my way to the end. I can be in the end because I'm going to be in control of this group over here.
Yeah.
But as we talked about before, his relationships with Erica and Heather were clearly very strained from the start. So it puts him in a really difficult spot. But again, you have to look at the other people on the other side and say, okay, well, who's left over there?
Right.
But the stupid split. Anyway, I'll stop.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, though, I don't know that he was all depending on winning, because he did feel like he was Shan, and Shan convinced him that she didn't trust Ricard. So now you're in an even better spot in your mind. You think, and Shan is aligned with Danny and Deshawn, and you think you have an in with them. I think he felt he was in a solid position there.
Yeah, and I'm sure he did, because the people that were surrounding him were very convincing. Shan and Ricard were doing an incredible job convincing him he was fine. And Erica and Heather were doing an incredible job convincing him they didn't care about him. So, it's like, all right, well, then where do I find myself? I'll go with these people over here. Yeah.
Now, in the second tribal council, we already talked about how turning against the majority group could have worked if Xander had used either his extra vote or his idol, but he decided to keep those for himself, in part because I think he figured things were going his way anyway. We already discussed that at more length earlier, but again, another opportunity for an overthrow.
Yes.
And it didn't happen. Two tribal councils, 2 opportunities for overthrows, 0 actual
Boy, I was
occurrences.
hoping for an overthrow somewhere. I was like, come on.
Well, it's like, I mean, this happens in many seasons of Survivor and Big Brother, where you're like, the core group is playing so good by staying together, but you really want to see something happen to overthrow them. And you've got this battle, or at least I know when I watch, I have this battle. I know lots of other people are like, you always want to root for the underdog. I don't always root for the underdog. I root for good gameplay. It's good gameplay for the core group to stay together. It would have been good gameplay for the outsiders to overthrow them.
Right.
Either way is good gameplay. So, it just
And it's
depends
tough,
on who you're
but
talking about.
this is what I find interesting about, with the core group, because listen, I'm all about, if you've got the numbers and you can make it to the end, who cares about entertaining the audience? Like, get
Exactly.
there then, because that's what you need to do. You need to win the
Right.
game. But then you start focusing on, well, who's in that core group? And you have someone like Deshaun, who is clearly not happy with how things are transpiring and is trying to voice his opinion. And you've seen that narrative becoming more and more apparent between he and Shan, that they're kind of butting heads. And so that's when someone like Deshaun has to look at where he is in that group and make a decision. It's the same thing we talked about just now with Naseer. Where do you fall in that group? And if it's not going to benefit you to stay in that group, you have to start looking at what are your other options. And your options begin to dwindle greatly when you vote all of those options out. And so but again, I'm with you. Like, if it's good gameplay, stick with it. But if it's not good gameplay to help you win, then that's when you need to try to stir the pot a little bit. And I think that's what we were all kind of looking at, is there are people on this season that their gameplay has been really great. Evvie, we've talked about already. Xander's been doing a great job. We just love Naseer. We want to root for these people because they are entertaining, but also they're doing a great job playing the game. And so I think it's entertaining for us as viewers because we're rooting for them. And it's not because we're rooting against the people who are in the majority. We are just rooting for, may the best man or woman or person win. And that's what we're looking for.
Right. All right, we can move to Appendix B, which is going to be real short because it talks about the jury phase of the game, and I don't really think it came into play here, other than obviously wanting to get two people out who are well liked, and nobody wanted to face them in the end.
I know, but we should talk about how fun the current person is on the jury.
Yes. I mean, yeah, obviously, yes. There was the jury of the first tribal council where the immunity insect was created. I do wonder what the timing was there. Like, was it really exactly when Heather said
it appeared like it was, because there was a reaction? No, but I didn't Heather say something like, there it is or something?
Well, I think Heather, I think Tiffany pointed at it. But then Heather was like, look, it didn't happen or something like that. So I don't know if it was cleverly intercut or really did happen in exactly
but it was
that
awesome.
way. It was
Tiffany's
very
still
funny
in the show.
way. Yep.
Even sitting in the jury.
Yes. So, all right. Well, it is about time to wrap things up. So, Jessica, what are your final thoughts?
Okay. Who do I need to start with?
You can start with whoever you want to start with.
Okay. I'll start with Naseer. And I will just say that Naseer, thoroughly enjoyed watching him on my television because just incredible all around. Very just happy. We've already discussed it. Just a really incredible individual overall. But unfortunately, sometimes when you play Survivor, the way that you exude yourself is also the way people will perceive you, and then that starts to work against you. And I do think that this is what we saw with Naseer. Naseer was someone who went out there trying to play the game pretty hard right away, realizing, no, I got to put the brakes on, and then switched it up, which was great, relying mostly on who he was as a person, his ability to provide for the group, his ability to be great in challenges, his ability to just kind of take care of everyone that was around him, starting fires, doing all of those things that he knew he could do well at, and then playing it up for them in order to show them, hey, listen, you need me. I'm a necessity. But also, how could I ever be the strategy mastermind that you have to worry about? Because I'm just the caregiver. I'm taking care of you, and I'm making you feel comfortable and safe in this place that we call home. And so props to Naseer for coming up with that strategy and that gameplay. Unfortunately, it didn't work out for him because it ended up making him more of a threat in the end, because people looked at him and said, hey, this guy's really great. He can do anything. He's incredibly likable, and he's a challenge beast, and he's good at whatever he tries to do. So we've talked about it before. When you get down to that final three, and sometimes you look at their gameplay and they all kind of have a similar gameplay, what becomes the next factor? It's a likability factor. And we do think that Naseer has that likability factor, and he probably would have been able to utilize that sitting there in the final three. And the guy's just so damn happy. Could you imagine him in a final tribal council? Like when you want to see,
He'd just be smiling the whole time.
He would. Like, he would be living his best life sitting in that final tribal council, and you couldn't help but
everybody would have just been like, Naseer, you know.
I know. It would have been incredible to watch. And he just has that effect on the people around him. And I don't think that we see that very often with Survivor players that just kind of emanate themselves in the way that Naseer does. But he really did. And there was just something really endearing and incredible about it. But unfortunately, that's not going to help you on Survivor, because the people he's playing with are smart enough to realize that's going to make him win the game in the end. Right. So we've got to get rid of him. So unfortunately, we lost Naseer, walked home with an idol in his pocket. But that we've already talked about why that happened. He's playing the game with people that are very sneaky, that are very strategic, that are really like bringing it on hard. And he wasn't doing that same type of gameplay. So unfortunately, we did lose Naseer. As for Evvie, just a really incredible individual as well. Very impressive in everything that they've accomplished in life, everything that they have provided to our televisions. And so I do think that Evvie walked into this game desirous of controlling what was happening. And that was exactly what we saw Evvie do. They were able to turn the game around in a way that they wanted it to be played, right? Playing with people that they wanted to play with and controlling those people at the same time without those people thinking they were being controlled, which was an incredible feat for anyone to pull off. Unfortunately, the numbers didn't work out for Evvie, and Evvie found herself on the bottom, but Evvie was still able to fight and try to bring herself back onto the top, which is incredibly impressive. And I will say that a lot of Evvie's exit press was a little bit triggering because she talked a lot about rocks and where Evvie found herself because of the rock draws. I feel for you, Evvie. I'm with you. I get it.
Well, you only had one rock draw. I don't know what your problem was. I mean,
yeah, it was pretty major rock draw. All right. Pretty big one. I much rather would have preferred picking a yellow rock and ending up on the losing tribe and not getting to eat food, as opposed to, you don't get $1 million now. Yeah. Aw, bye.
Bye-bye. Yeah.
Anyway, but Evvie, yes. So I do think that Evvie was a huge threat in both the strategic gameplay that Evvie brought, but also her ability to really control the narrative in the way that she was in the conversations that were being had. And honestly, their Ponderosa, so freaking adorable. If you haven't seen it yet, go watch it. It really is great to see the conversations that are being had amongst Tiffany and Evvie and Naseer, and just how much they all know America loves them. Like we just all love them. They really are incredible people to watch on television, but also just incredible human beings all around. So thank you for that. We appreciate it.
Yeah. All right. Well, both Naseer and Evvie had a lot going for them. They were both enjoying the hell out of being on Survivor, and it showed. They were outgoing and fun, and they were playing the game. Evvie playing harder than Naseer. And that accidentally caused some trouble. I'm just not sure that it mattered. I think it was mostly a convenient excuse for Xander to use in order to go his own way, rather than staying with what he felt was a sinking ship. Evvie was going down with that ship until Deshaun seemed to throw a life ring. But when Evvie went to grab it, it turned out he had cut the rope and left Evvie floating out to sea. Naseer similarly made a new relationship at the merge, in his case with Shan. Like so many before him, she made it seem like she was his number one and got him to trust her, only to put a knife in his back. In this case, it seemed like Ricard was the one who had put the knife in her hand, told her exactly how to plunge it in. So they did the stabbing together after Shan had set him up. As Naseer said in an interview, sometimes you have to trust someone and have a human connection. That wasn't the right person to trust, obviously. Now, that could really be said for both of them. Both were big threats. Neither was in a power position. Both needed to rely on the honesty of others. But those people all chose loyalty to each other instead. In a situation where there is a core alliance and a people on the fringes outside that alliance, it's not surprising that the core would still hold at this point. Neither Naseer nor Evvie could be allowed to get further and get their hooks deeper into the game. They were threats who needed to be eliminated so the core alliance could dominate. And that is why Naseer and Evvie lost.
That was great.
Thank you. You know what else is great?
What?
T-shirts.
T-shirts.
Yeah. So let me remind everyone before we get to our predictions that the rules we just discussed are
we
available.
Don't need to do predictions. That's fine.
Oh yeah, we're still doing them. And people should definitely hang around for them. But first, remember
this is when you turn off my video.
No. You go to robhasawebsite.com/yxlostfeed. You can get the poster. You can get the poster T-shirt. You can get the checklist T-shirt. You can get the mug. There's the mug.
You can get everything.
Everything your heart desires there.
So many things.
And yeah, things you didn't even know you desired.
Right. That's what happens when you go shopping online. You're like, I didn't even know this existed.
Yeah, I think we need blankets. Saw that there are Survivor blankets. We need We need to make poster blankets.
Oh my God.
Yeah. Okay. We need to find
that has been put out into the universe.
Out into the universe. We just need to figure it out.
That's amazing.
But what else has been put out into the universe? It's prediction time.
No, I'm quitting.
Yeah. I have long, detailed predictions.
Oh, do you? Good. Yeah, Go right ahead. Okay. Knock it out of the park.
Okay. Now, in my conclusion, I said Naseer and Evvie needed to be eliminated so the core alliance could dominate. Of course, the question is whether they actually will. I'll say this. That group will definitely not be the final five.
Okay? Oh, I agree.
I don't think they can hold it together. The question is when they will break. And this is, something that's been coming up like I think Steven said on Know-It-Alls. Like, there's a reason they've been showing us Deshawn and Shan going at each other. It's got to blow up at some point.
Right.
As far as this next episode, the preview tells us that certain people in the group want to vote out Ricard to reduce Shan's power. Using Hubicki's law, I think that means Ricard is perfectly safe. The question is if Deshawn might then take the next logical step and just go after Shan herself. After all, one reason Naseer was targeted now was because he wouldn't expect it and, use his idol. The same logic holds if someone wants to turn on Shan now and she doesn't expect it. I just don't know if they're ready for all-out war. But here's the thing. And this is what I was talking about earlier, where you were talking about allies. If Deshawn is ever going to start a war, it makes sense to do it now while he still has an army. We know he's close with Heather. We know Heather brings along Erica. That means Deshawn could theoretically use those two when the pieces are being picked up after any first strike. Danny would probably also side with him. Those two may well be able to pick up Xander from what we've seen. Even though they didn't vote with Xander this time, it still looks like they have a relationship.
Well, because where else is Xander going to go?
Right.
Yeah.
They could really flip this game if they are willing to go after someone like Shannon blindside her. Then again, they might instead target Liana for the same reason Ricard's name was brought up. But I don't see the point in going after an ally because it still breaks the alliance and it warns Shan to use her idol next time. The only reason to do that would be if you're sure Shan is going to use her idol this time, then you redirect the vote at Liana.
Right.
But the whole point would be surprise Shan when she's not expecting it.
Right. I think the only concern is that you got to keep so many people in check in order to pull that off.
Right.
Because she has an idol.
Yes. So when I was outlining in my notes all the predictions, I didn't think I was going to go in this direction. It's just one of these things you let your brain go.
Okay.
And you end up there. But I think I may have talked myself into predicting that Shan will go next. It seems crazy, but the logic is there. If Deshawn wants to make it happen.
Right.
The tension has been building. As I said, these were not red herrings. Something has to give. I think it gives this week, and Shan is blindsided.
That's interesting. Because I do think that, and maybe I'm going to read too much into a comment that Naseer made when he played his word association game. But one of the way he described Deshaun was before the merge, strategic. After the merge, emotional, which I thought was interesting. I was like, that's strange. And I do think that we've actually been seeing that because there's been a lot of headbutting with he and Shan. Now, if there is one thing that we've learned about Shan is that she's pretty hardcore in trying to make things turn out the way that she wants them to turn out, right? And we've seen the way that she's able to talk to people, and she does seem to be able to control people in a way that I think others on the season are just not able to do. We've seen it with Evvie, but not to the extent that we've seen it with Shan.
Right.
So I'm curious why Danny would choose Deshaun over Shan in that particular situation. Because what have we been told about Deshaun time and time again? Socially, he's great. He's a likable person. He's someone that people just like. I mean, his social gameplay has been good up to this point, at least from what we've been seeing and what we've been hearing. So if you're Danny, do you want to take someone who's likable, like Deshaun, and bring him along? Or do you want to bring someone like Shan, who people are starting to get really frustrated with and feel like she's the mastermind or the boss, but telling people what to do? So it's interesting to see which side Danny would fall on. Like, who's he going to choose? Is he going to choose Deshaun, or is he going to choose Shan? So too many things happening. Yes. So I don't know, because then you also have Ricard in there. I feel like what you've put together is really incredible and would be very fascinating. But I think the concern that I have is that there's too many people that need to be willing to make that jump that are not there yet. And I think Danny is definitely not there yet. I think this is where that team mentality for Danny, I think, is going to become a problem. Where Danny is going to be like, let's keep the team together. Like, let's keep the team strong. We're all doing this. We're all playing this together. Let's do that. And I don't know if he's going to go that way. And then you also have Liana, who's also definitely not going to go that way.
Right.
And so I really think your problem is going to be like the Heathers and Ericas of the group, who are non-committal and don't really seem to have, the strategic mindset that the people they're playing the game with. And so I don't think you're going to be able to keep it a secret. I just don't. I think someone's going to say the wrong thing. Heather's going to talk. Something's going to be said. Shan's going to know what's going on. And then Shan's not going to go home because someone's going to let the cat out of the bag. If that's what Deshaun pushes to do, then that's not going to happen. And then I think the ramification of that is Deshaun gets voted out.
Ooh. Yeah. Okay. Wow. All right. So we both think that the war is going to happen.
Yeah.
We just have we picked opposite winners.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, now I do have some additional predictions to make for further in the game. I want to get on the record.
Okay? We're making a record.
Sure. Well, that way, if I'm right, I can point back to it. And if I'm wrong, I can just forget it was ever said.
Okay.
At this point, I feel like Xander is almost certain to be in the final three.
Me too. 100%.
I think we talked about it on last week's podcast. The way the editors have given him certain lines and credit for doing things that others did just makes me think they're doing it for a reason. Sorry for the edit reading, but that's what I'm doing.
Me too.
Now, similarly, I wonder if we could be getting the whole quote unquote Erica is schemy claims that we've heard.
Oh, she's in the final three too.
Yes, 100%. Exactly. Because every time someone says that, a bunch of people on Twitter are like, what, she is? How? Where? Yeah. What are you talking about? I think it may be, they say in script writing, you should show, don't tell.
Yeah.
But I think this is a case of the producers telling, not showing. Like, we can't show it, so we're going to tell you.
Yeah.
So if I'm right about those two, and it sounds like you're in agreement, then we have to wonder about the third. I've said before that Heather's edit would be perfect for a 0-vote finalist. But at the same time, I also think Ricard and Deshawn have put themselves in good spots. You obviously differ on Deshawn.
Well, because I just feel like he's going to be the collateral damage.
Right. Now, maybe both of those two will end up being victims of the war that I'm predicting breaks out, and you're predicting that Deshawn already will be. But does that mean the final three could be Xander, Erica, and Heather? I think it could be.
That's fascinating.
I think that's what we're looking at, which means if that's true, then obviously either Xander or Erica win.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, Erica's not winning, or Heather's not winning with the edit she got.
No.
You might argue Erica's not winning with the edit she got because she was almost invisible most of it also. Right. But
well, and I do think it's interesting because when Naseer was asked to describe Erica, he called her lucky.
I mean, that could be just because she kept picking that rock, you know.
Or that she ends up in the final three.
Well, yeah, that's true too.
So. Oh, this would be fascinating. Fascinating. But I am all about Xander and Erica being, I think that and it is terrible because I hate to read the edit too, but we do. And you kind of have to. And then
I mean, we're not educ people. We're not out there charting stuff. You know, we're
not at all.
Just looking at what's been given to us.
But it is weird that Xander is being given credit for things that he didn't come up with.
Right.
And it is interesting that there's this kind of like Erica is becoming more and more of a focal point. Yeah. And they were talking about her very early on, and we were all very confused. Like, what?
Right.
Huh? Like, what are they even talking about? Like, we're not, like you said, we're not seeing that. So it is interesting, you know, why they're even including certain components of those two individuals throughout the edit, but they definitely are. So.
Yeah. Yeah. You kind of wonder, I mean, you know, this is, you know, if you're an editor on Survivor now, you don't know who wins the game because they don't, you know, Jeff Probst doesn't tell you that. Only Jeff and like maybe one other person knows that. So you're an editor, you're putting together this episode, and someone comes to you and says, yeah, you got to put a little bit in there about Erica being sneaky. Really? That never comes into play. Why do I need to do that?
Yeah.
Just put it in, you know? So
I've heard rumor, and I don't know if this is true, that the reveal was actually done on the island.
Yes, in this case, you're correct. I have heard that is true and out there, that for, you know, they didn't want to have another Zoom reunion.
Yeah.
So,
which means a whole lot of people know who won.
Well, yes, at this point, a whole lot of people know. So, but hopefully they're all sticking to their contracts and not.
Well, right. But I'm just, as far as the editors are concerned,
that's
like
true. I'm talking about, I just mean in general, because we've seen that over the years where something will be dropped in, you know.
Oh yeah. And it has to be strange. You're like, here's your guide for your editing today. Things that you need, things that need to be included. There's like, they have their own checklist.
Yes. Yes.
It's Erica is sneaky. What?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. All right. Well, as we wrap up here, I want to encourage people to check out the RHAP patron program at robhasawebsite.com/patron, or of course our YX Lost feed page. We've talked about before, November, great month to become a patron. So you can get access to our weekly Survivor 41 Q&A show, the Patron 5 for 5, and more. Plus Survivor Patron Trivia Night returned this month with like 400 participants. And when Rob isn't talking directly to everyone, there are Facebook groups, Discord, everything to keep you occupied with a great community of people where you can talk about all sorts of things, including, of course, Survivor. You can support shows like ours, everything on the network, by becoming a patron at robhasawebsite.com/patron, or just click on the link at robhasawebsite.com/YXLostFeed. And, you know, we say November is a great month to do it. We're coming near the end of November. We understand if you want to wait till December. Patrons, you know, giving someone in your life who's a fan, making them a patron, that's a great holiday present.
That is
just
a great
putting that out
present
there too. And I know that's been done by some people. And of course, once you get to the Facebook groups, just make sure to say hello.
And you should definitely also say hello to us on Twitter. I am at Jessica Lewis right here. at JessicaLewis89.
Yeah,
and he's at David Bloomberg. You should follow us both to get both sides of the story. We do live tweeting during the episode, so you are being forewarned. If you're listening to this, I'm sorry if we've ever spoiled anything for you, but we do live tweet during the episodes. We also tweet throughout the week, not just Survivor-related content, but you should definitely follow us both at JessicaLewis89, at David Bloomberg. And don't forget that David Bloomberg has taken TikTok by storm and is taking it over.
It's a small storm. It's more like
definitely follow him at his TikTok, which is at David Bloomberg or at David _Bloomberg.
Yes. Bingo.
Okay, I got it. So
yes,
at David Bloomberg at David Bloomberg. I'm going to stop saying it. Follow him on TikTok.
That's right. And of course, use the hashtag for this podcast, YXLost. I'm also on Instagram, where in case you're not on TikTok and you're on Instagram, where I'm David.E.Bloomberg, because we're trying to make it as confusing as possible to follow.
I know, because I'm at Jessica Lewis 6789 on Instagram. Because social media.
Other David Bloombergs beat me to the punch. Who knew?
Crazy, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And also, of course, make sure you subscribe to all of the RHAP Survivor podcasts by going to our YX Lost feed page. Mm-hmm. You'll find great content, the Know-It-Alls, the B&B, Taryn Armstrong Stockwatch, Shannon Gus's International, and much more.
And we should thank everyone who works so diligently to bring this all together. So thank you, Scott St. Pierre, for all of the editing that you do, not only for Why Blank Lost, but all of the RHAP content. Thank you so much for everything you do. We truly appreciate it. And thank you to Will from America for the incredible theme song that he did create for this podcast in particular. It's very catchy. Thank you for that. And thank you, David Bloomberg, for spending almost 2 hours with me at this point. So we appreciate you all listening for almost 2 hours as well. This was a big one. We had 2 people to talk about. So thank you so much for hanging in there. 2 people and a
complicated use of an advantage. Yes.
Oh, God. Yeah.
So hopefully no one out there hates our face by now, Now, yes. And thank you, Jessica, also. And, while the next episode of Survivor airs the night before Thanksgiving, you won't hear from us before then. So happy Thanksgiving to everyone, at least in the U.S. And we're not exactly sure what our schedule will be, because the interview comes out like Monday. The interviews come out Monday. Mm-hmm. So we're not quite sure when we're recording yet. Maybe at our normal time, and we'll just have to forego getting information from the interviews. We may postpone. We aren't sure yet. But, right around a week from now, we will see everyone again.
Yes.
So watch for us, listen for us, and we'll see you then.
That's
Bye.
Right.